How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. Hopefully everyone is having a lovely day. So the Bengals got ran over by the Cleveland Browns 24-3. The Bengals' worst loss arguably in the Joe Burrow era, and it's, keep in mind, it was a Cincinnati Bengals team that was 2-14 when he came over. Raining conditions, bad field conditions, but all that being said, the Browns scored 24 points. So it was a factor in the game, but Browns found a way to score. Dallas, New York, I mean, it was dumping rain. Dallas scored 40 points. So we do have to keep that in mind where, yeah, it does factor the game. No questions about it. But we have to just be able to admit, too, hey, the Bengals had a bad game, and it happens. Teams have bad games. Bengals, good teams lay eggs. I mean, heck, those Chiefs Bengals are all supposed to be Super Bowl favorites. All of them lost this week. It happens. Can't be panicked too much about that. Cleveland, you got to believe they're going to be a good team this year, right? I mean, all things considered, yeah, the Bengals looked rusty. Yeah, the field conditions weren't the great, but that Cleveland defense locked down this offense, and they've done it before in the past. We talked about it when we previewed the game beforehand. How Chase and Higgins do not perform well for the most part against Cleveland. They found a way to slow them down. You got that pass rush to get to the quarterback. So I think you got to credit Cleveland. If Deshaun Watson doesn't miss a couple receivers, it would have been really ugly. He missed a couple guys deep open, but again, could have been the weather conditions, could have been Deshaun, who knows? But Cleveland seems to be, rolling early. We'll see what happens there. I mean, it's too early in the season to tell. But the Bengals, I think the bigger picture here is because it is becoming the normal. We talked about it. I see a lot of other Bengals fans talk about it, where it's like you're almost numb to the feeling when you lose to the Browns. It's just like, whatever, they out game plan us, they outplay us, they don't match up well, I guess, every single time. And beat them one time in the last 3 years. And that's tough. Weather conditions, they were tough. Kind of scratched off as a mulligan. But the other glaring concern we're hearing a lot of chatter about now, more and more, is Zac Taylor benching the Bengals starters throughout the preseason. It's become a Zac Taylor usual, and it's become a Cincinnati Bengals usual, where they walk into the season and they just look really unprepared, they look rusty, and they're not ready to go. Which brings the question up of, is it hurting the Bengals more than it's helping them by Zac Taylor benching these starters? I looked around the league. At first place you look was Kansas City. Won 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls. Patrick Mahomes played in the preseason. Kansas City starters played in the preseason. It's a big deal because, again, I think what a lot of teams do, they call it the dress rehearsal, whatever. A lot of teams will do, they go out, they'll throw your team out there for a drive. They'll say, how are we looking? If they're looking a little sloppy, look like they work on things, you throw them out there for another drive. You can't quite sim up live game action in practice like you can in a real preseason game. So it's really important to kind of work those kinks out. And we see that of a Bengals team, especially early, or that stuff might glare a little bit more early this season because you haven't had a chance to work those kinks out. Even if it's only a quarter, you get a chance to watch some tape, maybe play another quarter, another drive next week, get a chance to watch some tape. And again, maybe not all of your starters play both games. Maybe all of them play one game, not the other one. You say, okay, where do we need to work on some things? So you're prepared for week 1. And now the flip side of that, obviously, is if you play those starters for a quarter, or you play those guys for 2 games, 2 quarters, and they get hurt. And they get hurt, season-ending injury, and preseason, it should never happen. And that's the reason, Taylor keeps these guys off the field, tries to keep them well-rested, and I completely understand it. But I think you start to question the risk-reward, because let's fly. The Bengals right now, under Joe Burrow, in his career, in the first 2 games of the season, the Cincinnati Bengals hold a 1-6 record. In the rest of the games, from week 3 on in Joe Burrow's career, the Bengals are 23-12-1. Let that sink in a little bit. 1-6, 23-12-1. So there's clearly a pattern here, whether it be the Bengals not game planning, whether it be the Bengals just being rusty and not looking ready. And a lot of the time it is looking rusty and not ready. Now there's a couple things behind that. Obviously, Joe Burrow has not been able to get preseason games, and he's been struggling with the injuries. Things have been coming up. That's understandable. There's also other guys that aren't dealing with injuries. And we see them make mistakes. We see them, lack the continuity, if you will. I think you look at last season especially. It started 0-2. The offensive line struggled. Of course it did. There was you really revamped and redid the entire offensive line. Minus one player. That was old face. Everybody else was brand new. So you revamped an entire offensive line. Continuity in offensive line is as important as anything. So you think and say, hey, if these guys could have got some preseason reps in, a couple games together, build a little bit of continuity. That way, going into the season, they protected your quarterback a little bit more. What's more important? The chances of one lineman, there's a chance, obviously, but the slim chances of getting a really significant injury in the preseason of one of your offensive linemen getting hurt, or what would be that being detrimental? What's worse, that or Joe Burrow getting hurt because he's getting killed and getting wrecked and destroyed by the opposing team? It's stuff like that. Or it's like, yeah, that quarterback couldn't have played, but there's other players, these other guys that haven't played together that can start to gel and be prepared and ready to go for week one. Everybody can have everybody else can be go, and you just wait on Burrow figured out. Burrow's that kind of competitor. And the other risk you run is, let's talk about last season. Let's talk about the season before. Bengals are a bubble team dang near until the end of the season. And it was weak. They did end up made that impressive run, beating the Chiefs. That gauntlet, beating the Chiefs teams you didn't think it was going to beat. But you look at it and say, hey, and look at it last season and say, hey, they started 0-2. I don't think there's any questions about it. We all watched that Pittsburgh Steelers game and said they should have beat the Steelers. There's no reason they should have lost that game. You lose to the Cowboys by 3. Cowboys nasty defense, really good. So it's hard to completely judge. We say, hey, if they're a little bit more in midseason form, they might be. You can see why they wouldn't won both, but they definitely should have went 1-1. You go 1-1. The Bills game happens and you beat the Bills, and all of a sudden you should have had the number 1 seed. So what's more important, getting that 1 quarter off, 2 quarters off into preseason, or getting an entire week off and home field advantage throughout the playoffs? What would we be talking about right now if the Cincinnati Bengals had home field advantage against the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game? Because the Bengals dang near won that football game on the road. Can you imagine if Patrick Mahomes and company had to go to Cincinnati, a place he has not won, a team that has not beat Joe Burrow, and you had to go into that environment and play that football game? Ifs and buts at the end of the day, but we have to fast forward now to this season, though, and think what happens. That's almost what it feels like at the end of the day. Is you want to believe the Bengals are good enough where they're going to make playoffs no matter what, and that's the problem too. Is you say, hey, what happens if they weren't ready week 1, and now all of a sudden they're going to miss playoffs by a game because they lost the game they shouldn't have. I'm not saying that's Cleveland. Again, I think Cleveland's a great team. Cleveland's tough to play on the road. They probably lose that game regardless of what time of season it is. I think that stuff's important, though, to consider when you're a coach going forward, because again, that especially when it comes to the number 1 seed, it's always about that. Probably 1 loss differential. One team be 14-3, 1 15-2, 1 12-4. But you lose week 1, you essentially have to go 15 or 14-2 the rest of the season if you want that number 1 seed. Gives you guys a chance to rest up, home field advantage at the playoffs, puts you really in the best position to win a Super Bowl. You're always going to play the lowest seed in the playoffs until the championship game. Things to consider. So from my perspective, I say, hey, look, I get it. I understand completely. I respect the decision of Zac Taylor saying we got to bench these guys, because the last thing you want to do is see Jamar Chase tear an Achilles in the preseason. Or the last thing you want to see is Trey Hendrickson break an arm in the preseason. But sometimes you kind of almost have to take that chance for the sake of getting your team to be better in the regular season. And as we mentioned before, making sure your players are protected in the regular season. You want them to be in the best shape, best physical condition. Again, prepared to protect your quarterback at all costs, and vice versa. Thankfully, though, we gotta say this to the Bengals. Thankfully, in that nasty game, weather conditions wise, the Bengals came out without any injuries, nothing significant. So that's great. Great news for the Cincinnati Bengals. Thankful for that. Thankful for the health of this football team. And there's no question about it. I think this team is going to get on the right track. I think they'll beat the Ravens. I do. I don't know how it's going to look yet. I think they'll beat the Ravens. Hopefully this isn't a conversation that's going to get brought up every season. But right now it is glaring amongst Bengals fans. I thought, you know what? Let's talk about it. Let's hear about your guys' thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.